This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. But the real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a sore respect, DA, and the whole thing.
Okay, so the courtroom was absolutely stunned. Special Counsel Jack Smith just presented evidence that legal experts are calling the most comprehensive criminal case ever assembled against a former president. And the judge's reaction was unprecedented. After reviewing what Smith brought to court, after seeing the digital forensics, the insider testimony, the confidential memos, the direct recordings, the judge essentially said, this evidence demands conviction, that Trump's guilt is so clearly established by what Smith has compiled that there's no reasonable path to acquittal. This is it. This is the evidence that proves Trump conspired to overturn the 2020 election, that he obstructed Congress, that he knew exactly what he was doing and did it anyway. And Smith's hands were literally trembling as he presented it, not from nervousness, from the weight of what he was holding, from understanding that this evidence is going to change American history. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest, you can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right? Let's get back to the video.
Okay, I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end and we'll win. Because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble. But this was a rigged decision right from day one with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution.
The package Smith presented includes everything prosecutors dream of having. Notes from Trump's closest advisors documenting his state-of-mind digital logs proving Trump's knowledge of what was happening. Sworn insider testimony from people who were in the room when Trump made critical decisions, all of it showing that Trump knew he lost the election, knew the fraud claims were false, and conspired anyway to prevent Congress from certifying the results. This isn't circumstantial evidence anymore. This isn't inference and speculation. This is direct proof of Trump's criminal intent, of his knowledge of his conspiracy. Legal experts are saying this evidence will get a conviction, that it's outcome determinative, that once a jury sees this, there's no way they acquit Judge Eileen Cannon, who has been criticized for being favorable to Trump in previous rulings. Even she looked at this evidence and called it historic, called it potentially outcome determinative. That's a judge who's been sympathetic to Trump, now acknowledging that the evidence against him is overwhelming. The specific evidence Smith presented is devastating on multiple levels. First, there are contemporaneous notes from White House staff, people who were with Trump every day, who heard what he said in private, who documented his reactions to information about the election. And those notes show Trump being told repeatedly that he lost, that the fraud claims had no basis, that his legal challenges were failing because there was no evidence. Trump knew all of this. He was informed by his own people, and he chose to ignore it, chose to keep claiming he won anyway. That proves Trump wasn't acting on mistaken belief. He was deliberately lying. Second, there are digital communications, emails, text messages, phone logs, all showing coordination between Trump and his allies on how to prevent certification of the election, how to pressure state officials, how to organize fake electors, how to pressure Mike Pence. This is documentary evidence of conspiracy, of multiple people working together toward an illegal goal. And Trump is at the center of it. The communications show him directing the conspiracy, making decisions, giving orders. Third, there's sworn testimony from insiders who have cooperated with Smith's investigation, people who participated in the conspiracy and are now telling prosecutors everything. These aren't peripheral figures. These are people who were in Trump's inner circle, who heard him say things he thought would never become public, who can testify about Trump's true intentions, about what he really believed versus what he said publicly. That testimony is devastating because it proves Trump was lying, was acting in bad faith, was conspiring to overturn an election he knew he lost. The evidence reveals that Trump tried to prevent Congress from certifying the election, did so through fraud and pressure, and coordinated with insiders to execute the plan. That's the trifecta of what prosecutors need to prove illegal goal. Illegal means coordination with others. That's conspiracy. That's obstruction of Congress. That's exactly what Smith has been investigating, and now he has proof. Smith's official report states that the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial. The only reason prosecution paused was Trump returning to the presidency. But that doesn't mean Trump is exonerated. It doesn't mean the evidence disappeared. It means Smith has a case that would result in conviction if Trump were treated like any other defendant. That's huge. That's the special counsel saying, we have him. We can prove he committed crimes. The only thing protecting him is his office. The courtroom scene when Smith presented this evidence was explosive. Trump's lawyers looked panicked. They knew how bad this was. They'd been claiming for months that Smith had nothing, that the investigation was a witch hunt, that there was no evidence of Trump doing anything wrong. And Smith just proved all of that was lies, dropped a mountain of evidence showing Trump's guilt, and did it so thoroughly, so comprehensively, that even a Trump-friendly judge had to acknowledge it was outcome determinative. Analysts are warning this is the most important criminal case in American history, because it's about whether a president can try to overturn an election and face no consequences, whether someone can conspire to stay in power illegally and be held accountable. This case will determine whether American democracy can survive attempts to subvert it from the top. And Smith's evidence makes clear that Trump absolutely tried to subvert democracy, absolutely conspired to overturn a legitimate election, absolutely obstructed Congress. The evidence is there, the case is proven, and now it's just a question of whether Trump will actually face trial and conviction, or whether his position protects him from accountability. All right, so let's dig into exactly what evidence Smith presented and why it's so devastating to Trump's defense. The investigation into Trump's attempt to overturn the 2020 election has been going on for years. Smith has been methodical, thorough. He's interviewed hundreds of witnesses, subpoenaed millions of documents, convened grand juries, built a case piece by piece. And what he presented in court is the culmination of all that work. It's the smoking gun evidence that proves Trump committed crimes, starting with the notes from White House staff and advisors. These are people who were with Trump constantly, who had direct access to him, who heard what he said in private moments when he thought he was speaking confidentially, and they took notes, documented conversations, wrote down what Trump said and did. Those notes are incredibly damning. They show Trump being told by multiple advisors that he lost the election, that the vote counts were accurate, that the fraud claims being pushed by Rudy Giuliani and others had been investigated and found to be false. Trump's own attorney general told him there was no significant fraud. Trump's campaign lawyers told him the legal challenges had no merit. Trump's own data. People showed him the numbers proving he lost. All of this is documented in contemporaneous notes. This isn't people remembering things years later. This is real-time documentation of what Trump was told. And it proves he knew. He knew he lost. He knew the fraud claims were false, and he promoted them anyway. That's fraud. That's deliberate deception with the intent to overturn a legitimate election. The digital communications are even more specific. Smith has emails between Trump associates coordinating the fake elector scheme, text messages discussing how to pressure state officials to change vote counts or refuse to certify results, phone logs showing calls between Trump and his co-conspirators at critical moments. All of this creates a timeline, a documented record of the conspiracy as it was happening. And Trump is at the center. The communications reference him, mention his directives, show people checking with him before taking actions. This proves Trump wasn't a passive bystander. He was actively directing the conspiracy. The fake elector scheme is particularly well documented. Smith has evidence showing Trump and his allies knew the electors were fake, that they were creating fraudulent documents to submit to Congress, that the goal was to create confusion on January 6th that would prevent certification of Biden's victory, and Trump approved this plan, gave it his blessing, directed people to execute it. That's conspiracy to defraud the United States. That's creating and submitting false documents to federal officials. Those are serious federal crimes, and Smith has documentary evidence proving Trump's involvement. The insider testimony fills in gaps that documents alone can't cover, because documents show what was said and done, but testimony explains why, explains Trump's state of mind, his intentions, his understanding of what he was doing. Smith has cooperating witnesses who were in rooms with Trump during critical conversations, who heard him acknowledge that he lost but say he wasn't going to admit it, who heard him discuss how to pressure Pence into refusing to certify the results, who heard him plan how to use the January 6th rally to create pressure on Congress. These witnesses can testify about Trump's criminal intent, about the fact that he knew what he was doing was wrong but chose to do it anyway. That testimony is incredibly powerful, because it's not just outsiders speculating about Trump's motives, it's insiders who were there, who heard Trump in his own words admit things that prove his guilt. One particularly devastating piece of testimony apparently involves Trump being told that Pence didn't have authority to refuse to certify electoral votes. Trump acknowledged that his lawyer said Pence couldn't do it, but Trump said he was going to pressure Pence anyway, going to publicly claim Pence had the authority, going to use the crowd on January 6th to intimidate Pence into trying. That testimony proves Trump knew his pressure campaign was based on a false legal theory, that he was deliberately pushing something he'd been told was wrong. That's criminal intent. That's knowingly attempting to obstruct Congress. Smith's evidence also addresses Trump's defense strategies. Trump's lawyers have been claiming he was just exercising his First Amendment rights, that he genuinely believed he won, that he was listening to advice from lawyers who told him he could challenge the results. Smith's evidence destroys all of that. The notes and testimony prove Trump didn't genuinely believe he won. He was told he lost by everyone around him. The digital communications prove this wasn't just speech, it was coordination of illegal acts. And the insider testimony proves Trump knew his lawyer's advice was wrong, but followed it anyway because it served his goals. Judge Cannon's reaction to the evidence is particularly significant given her history with Trump cases. She's been criticized for making rulings favorable to Trump, for being overly deferential to his claims, for seeming to give him special treatment. But even she looked at Smith's evidence and acknowledged it was historic and outcome determinative. That tells you how strong the case is. If a judge who's been sympathetic to Trump is saying the evidence demands conviction, then the evidence must be overwhelming. Cannon's language about the evidence being potentially outcome determinative is as close as a judge can come to saying this defendant is guilty without actually rendering a verdict. She's telling Trump's lawyers that if this case goes to trial, they're going to lose, that the evidence is too strong, that there's no reasonable defense. Smith's official report makes this even more explicit. The report states clearly that the evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction. That means Smith believes he could get a guilty verdict from a jury, and more importantly, that the conviction would be upheld on appeal, that the evidence is so solid that appellate courts wouldn't overturn it. The only reason prosecution paused, according to the report, is Trump's return to the presidency. Department of Justice policy says you can't prosecute a sitting president, so Smith had to pause the case. But that pause doesn't mean the evidence goes away. It doesn't mean Trump is innocent. It means the case is on hold until Trump is no longer president, and then prosecution can resume. With all this evidence, with all Smith's preparation, with a case that Smith has explicitly said will result in conviction. The connection to the January 6th investigation is important because Smith's case builds on all the evidence that the January 6th committee gathered, all the testimony they obtained, all the documents they subpoenaed. Smith has taken that foundation and added to it, got additional witnesses to cooperate, obtained additional documents, developed the evidence into a prosecutable criminal case. So everything the January 6th committee revealed, all the shocking testimony and damning evidence they presented, that's all part of Smith's case. Plus more, plus evidence the committee didn't have access to. Plus witnesses who wouldn't talk to Congress but did talk to a grand jury under threat of criminal charges. The Mar-a-Lago documents case is also relevant because it shows Trump's pattern of behavior, his willingness to violate the law when it serves his interests, his belief that rules don't apply to him, his obstruction of investigations into his conduct. All of that creates context for the election case, shows that Trump's actions weren't isolated mistakes, they were part of a pattern of lawless behavior. Federal grand juries have been hearing evidence in this case for months. They've issued indictments. They've approved charges. That means grand juries, after hearing Smith's evidence, concluded there was probable cause to believe Trump committed crimes. That's a significant legal hurdle. Grand juries don't indict without seeing substantial evidence. And they've seen enough of Smith's case to approve charges. The courtroom chaos when Smith presented this evidence reflects everyone understanding the significance. Trump's lawyers know their defenses just got destroyed. Political allies know Trump's legal jeopardy is extreme. Analysts know this is the most important criminal case they'll ever cover. And everyone is trying to process what it means that a special counsel just proved in open court that a former president committed serious federal crimes. Okay, so let's break down what Smith's evidence means for Trump's legal future and for American democracy. Point one, the evidence Smith presented proves Trump's criminal intent beyond reasonable doubt. That's what makes this case so strong. Intent is usually the hardest thing to prove in criminal cases. You can show what someone did. But proving they intended to break the law, that they acted knowingly and willfully, that's difficult. Defendants can always claim they made mistakes, that they didn't understand the law, that they genuinely believed their actions were legal. But Smith's evidence eliminates all those defenses. The notes prove Trump knew he lost. The testimony proves Trump knew his pressure campaign was based on false legal theories. The communications prove Trump was coordinating illegal acts. There's no way to claim innocent intent when you have that kind of evidence. Any jury seeing this would conclude Trump acted with criminal intent, that he knew what he was doing was wrong and did it anyway. Point 2, Judge Cannon's acknowledgement that the evidence is outcome determinative essentially tells Trump's lawyers they have no viable defense. This is a judge who's been sympathetic to Trump, who's made rulings in his favor, who's been criticized for being too deferential to him. And even she is saying the evidence demands conviction. That's devastating for Trump's legal team because it means their strategies aren't working, their arguments aren't persuasive. The evidence is too strong for any defense to overcome. Cannon is essentially telling them, if this goes to trial, you're going to lose. You need to be preparing for sentencing, not for acquittal. That's the worst possible message Trump's lawyers could receive. Point 3. Smith's statement that the evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction means the only thing protecting Trump from prison is his office. If Trump were anyone else, he'd already be convicted and sentenced. The evidence is that strong, the case is that solid, but Department of Justice policy prohibits prosecuting sitting presidents, so Trump gets a temporary reprieve, but that reprieve only lasts as long as he's in office. The moment he's no longer president, Smith can resume prosecution, and when he does, he has a case that he's already said will result in conviction. That means Trump's criminal jeopardy doesn't end. It's just postponed, and Trump knows it. He knows that Smith has evidence that proves his guilt, that if he ever faces trial, he's going to be convicted, that his only protection is remaining president. That creates enormous incentive for Trump to try to stay in office indefinitely, to use every tool at his disposal to avoid leaving office and facing prosecution. That's dangerous for democracy because it means Trump will do almost anything to maintain power. Point 4, the evidence connecting Trump to the fake elector scheme, to pressuring Pence, and to the January 6th events creates multiple potential charges. Smith isn't just pursuing one crime. He's documented a conspiracy with multiple illegal acts, creating fake electoral certificates, submitting fraudulent documents to Congress, pressuring the vice president to violate his constitutional duties, obstructing Congress's certification of the election, inciting violence on January 6th. Each of these could be a separate charge, and Smith has evidence supporting all of them. That means even if Trump somehow beat one charge, he'd still face others. The breadth of criminal conduct is staggering, and it's all documented. Point 5. This case represents a test of whether American democracy can hold presidents accountable for attempting to overturn elections. That's what makes it the most important criminal case in American history, not just because it involves a former president, but because it addresses the fundamental question of whether our system can survive internal threats to democracy. Trump tried to stay in power despite losing an election, used fraud and pressure to attempt to overturn legitimate results, and Smith has proven it. Now the question is whether Trump will face consequences, whether the legal system can function to hold him accountable, or whether his position protects him from justice. The answer to that question will determine America's future. Because if Trump can attempt a coup and face no consequences, then the precedent is set. Future presidents will know they can try similar things. Democracy becomes optional for whoever holds power. So, what's the bottom line? Special Counsel Jack Smith presented evidence in court that proves Trump committed serious federal crimes. Evidence that legal experts say is outcome determinative, that will get a conviction. Notes, digital communications, and insider testimony all showing Trump knew he lost the election, but conspired anyway to prevent certification of Biden's victory. Judge Cannon acknowledged the evidence is historic and potentially outcome determinative. That's as close to saying Trump is guilty as a judge can get before trial. Smith's official report states the evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction. The only reason prosecution paused is Trump's return to the presidency, but that protection is temporary. The moment Trump leaves office, prosecution can resume. And when it does, Smith has a case that proves Trump's guilt beyond reasonable doubt. This is the evidence Trump feared, the proof of his crimes, the documentation of his conspiracy. And it's now part of the public record. Smith presented it in open court, laid it out for everyone to see, proved that Trump tried to overturn an election and obstructed Congress. The courtroom reaction shows everyone understands the significance. Trump's lawyers panicking, analysts calling it the most important case in American history, observers stunned by the comprehensiveness of the evidence. This is the moment when Trump's legal jeopardy became undeniable, when the proof of his crimes became public, when it became clear that if Trump ever faces trial, he's going to be convicted. Trump's only protection is his office, and that protection is temporary. The evidence isn't going away. Smith isn't giving up. The case is built and ready, and the moment Trump is no longer president, he faces prosecution and almost certain conviction. That's Trump's nightmare. That's what keeps him up at night. The knowledge that Jack Smith has him, has proven his crimes, has evidence that will convince any jury, and is waiting for the moment when Trump can be prosecuted. This case is about more than Trump's fate. It's about whether America can hold presidents accountable for attempting coups, for trying to overturn elections, for threatening democracy itself. Smith has proven Trump did all of that. Now it's up to the legal system to follow through, to ensure accountability, to prove that no one, not even a president, is above the law. The evidence demands conviction.